Now, I was talking to my sister, as I said earlier in the show, and she told me about how she'd been out for a meal with some friends of hers in Connecticut. And I went, "What's that? You went out for a meal? Really?" I can't remember the last time I went out for a meal. I think it was sometime in early December, but I'm not absolutely certain. Because you know how the months just roll into one another. Because in November they were all shut, the restaurants, weren't they? I think they reopened in December, and I think I went to a restaurant. But I've only been out probably for dinner maybe 4 times since the beginning of this nonsense last March. Let's find out how Emma McClarkin's doing, CEO of the British Beer and Pub Association. Emma, how are you?
I'm good, thank you, Mike.
Thank you very much for joining us. Very frustrating time it must be to do what you do. How are the kind of members of your association bearing up, and how many of them have kind of fallen by the wayside?
Well, this has been, a devastating time for the sector, the biggest crisis that we've ever faced. And I have to say, things are getting really, really tough. We're right in the face of business failure, many people coming to the end of their resources. And morale, I have to say, for our workforce is pretty low. It
Mm.
is really, really difficult with so much of the speculation about the future of our industry being played out on the front pages.
Yes, because of course, the stop-start kind of way that things have been going can't have been helpful to an awful lot of people who after all, are dealing with perishable items, aren't they?
Absolutely, and the decisions that were taken in and around Christmas cost, hundreds of thousands of pounds of wasted stock that people had got in, and hasn't been really recompensed for by any of the support that we've received from the government. And we do know that whilst we are in support of grants, and we're grateful for what we have got, it doesn't cover our fixed costs whilst we're remaining closed. So the cash burn effect in the background for our sector is somewhere close to 150 million a month, and that's after all grants received. It's almost untenable
Mm.
that we can continue being closed.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? Because there was an insurance issue, I think, as well, with some places where they weren't getting covered by insurance, when in fact the government money wasn't covering them at all. I mean, we've spoken to lots of publicans over the course of the year, really. Many of them, when they were in, say, for example, tier 2, said, look, we'd rather be put into tier 3, because at least in tier 3 you can get some compensation. Tier 2 is a nonsense, because you only allow like sort of 4 people into the pub, and they all have to sit a mile away from each other, and they have to have something to eat. And the restrictions have just been really almost as bad as they could be.
No, they absolutely have. And I was contacted by a publican only yesterday. You're paying hundreds of pounds a month for insurance, and they are refusing to pay out
Mm.
for pandemic, and the losses that they've had because of that. It is very, very real. This is people's livelihoods. This is their house over their heads. This is how they support their families, and everything is getting down to the wire. So we desperately need to hear from the Prime Minister what his plans are for
Mm.
getting us reopened. That's what we really need. We want to rebuild our trade, get ourselves out of the situation, but we need to have a reopening date for that.
Yes, I think so, because I was listening to Graham Brady the other day talking to Julia Hartley-Brewer, and he was saying that some businesses, and his constituency up near Manchester, and he said some businesses need a bit more time than just saying, on Friday, oh, you can open up on Monday. You need to get stock in, you need to organise staff. He was talking about the airline business, and how they might need a couple of months to try and get themselves prepared, because planes are all over the world, people are, off on furlough, this kind of thing, and so I think we all are willing to wait for a particular moment, but we need to know when that moment's going to be, don't we?
We have stressed this again and again, that our great British brewers, it takes a good 3 weeks to
Mm.
get to brew that beer, and of course we need fresh beer in our pubs to be ready. So we need at least 3 weeks' notice
Right.
in order to get them restocked. But there is a whole supply chain of people that are dependent on the pub sector getting open. It's not just the pubs ourselves; it's the whole of that supply chain, and all of our road to profitability and clawing our way back is dependent on on those dates. So we desperately need to have that notice, have a date, and be able to plan for our businesses to get them back on their feet.
Right. And I mean, as far as the future is concerned, I mean, would it be helpful, or have you even done this, because you may have, of providing the government with your own evidence to show that there's not really much danger in going to a pub which has already been made COVID secure, because people have spent quite a lot of money making sure that that's the case?
Absolutely. I mean, we got down to, but I think it was below 2% of transmission rates. And we've had very few instances of any outbreaks in any of our pubs. And we've participated fully in test and trace for the government and been commended for doing so. So the reality is we are not a high vector for transmission at all, despite being the back of the queue. And we need that message to get out there to the public, that just because we're last doesn't mean that we are a higher risk at all. We've invested over 500 million in mitigating the risks identified by SAGE in that setting. We did that last July. We've made those investments. There's no safer place to go than the pub.
No, of course. And as far as the rather sort of dopey, strange and unusual kind of little rules that they invented, such as, the curfew at 10 o'clock, they promised that's not going to be put back on, having admitted that it had no basis in science whatsoever. And also the idea that a substantial meal must be had with your drink. That seems to have gone by the wayside as well. It makes you wonder, who the hell's coming up with this stuff?
Well, unfortunately, we do keep having to restate to them that we covered off all of the risks that SAGE had listed in hospitality settings last July, where we reopened safely and successfully to world-leading standards. That was recognised and signed off by Public Health England, and everybody else at the time also agreed to that. So we've asked them to make decisions based on risk assessments to certain standards, and actually that all sectors should be held up to those same standards. We're seeing retail and non-essential retail being able to get open with much lower restrictions than what we have to adhere to in the hospitality sector. And we desperately need to find a way that we can get pubs open. And restrictions do have a deep economic pact, and we have shared all the data on the economic pact of each one of those restrictions that were layered on from September onwards.
Yes. And also, when you did open in July, we, being great supporters of the Great British Pub, we did a live show on July the 4th from a pub around the corner from our office here. And, there was no massive increase in infection rates in July or indeed in August. So whatever happened and whatever people went to pubs for, it did not cause an increase in COVID infection.
Well, we would, of course, see that probably reflected in our staff that are in our buildings first and foremost. They are our primary concern is the people that make up our hospitality business. And of course, we would see large numbers of our staff actually coming down with cases of COVID, and we just have not seen those instances reported. And we've had tens of millions of customers come through our venues, and we haven't seen those outbreaks reported. So this is the situation. This is the data that we are in possession of, and we are ready to again reopen as safely as we can to keep our staff and our customers safe.
Would you see a kind of a tiered opening process going on, perhaps? Because just before the final kind of lockdown at Christmas, there were, certainly in London, I don't know if it was happening elsewhere, there were certainly pubs that were doing sort of takeaway booze so that you could go and order it on a phone or on an app, go and get it and then walk away and drink it somewhere else.
Yeah, well, we've seen extraordinary resilience from the sector in adapting the services that they provide. Some have turned into shops, others have become takeaway. Yeah. And of course, some did sell beer as takeaway, either within a pint container or actually sealed kegs that were taken away. And that, unfortunately, the government took away from us at the last lockdown. That was actually forming a third of the income for some of our pubs. So it was a real blow that they weren't able to do that when the off licenses were allowed to sell that. Yeah. And of course, they are worried about alcohol consumption, and we seem to be bearing the brunt of those concerns.
Yes, and so you don't see them likely doing that first then, in terms of, say, if they're not ready to open up pubs so that you can actually go inside them, would they be willing to open them up so that some of your clients can actually make some money?
Well, it's really important that pubs are still able to sell alcohol. It's at the very core of what we do in a public house and what the Great British Pub is there for. And also we'll support our Great British brewers with our nation's favourite drink. We absolutely need to be having the ability to sell alcohol. But the reality is they are apparently through the media, as we've read, considering that we may get an outdoor opening. That would only actually facilitate 17% of pub trade. And as you can imagine, that is not a sustainable way of doing business. That is unprofitable and loss-making for many. So I imagine even if outdoor opening was considered with the ability of takeaway pints, it wouldn't be enough to see our pubs come off that support that they've been receiving from the government. So that support would need to continue. But frankly, we're safe to open up inside our venues as we are outdoors. So we would like to see a full opening for pubs at Easter and as soon as we possibly can.
Yeah, I mean, as far as many of your businesses are concerned, have they sort of still got enough energy and gas in the tank, I suppose, to go till April?
Well, we've already unfortunately lost 5% of our pubs, and there may be many more that will be coming in the coming weeks that we have. As I said, everybody is at the very end. The finance that they've had to get, the loans to carry them over, the debt that they are carrying on their back, it is all very precarious. And all the news and information about hospitality being the back of the queue, being under heavy restrictions, not getting back to profitability within a reasonable time frame, puts all of those businesses at extra risk. So we're doing everything we can to say, if you want to save the Great British Pub, please set a date. Please set the restrictions so that we can work with you on them to avoid unintended consequences like the curfew, and make sure that we can get back to profitability as soon as possible.
And what about the different sort of nations and how they've been reacting to all of this? Because I know up in Scotland, it's been really difficult for pub owners, because even when they were open, they were banned from playing music of any kind in case it was too exciting for people and they started shouting over it or singing or something like that. So, I mean, there is a sense, and I'm sure this is not the case, but there is a sense, and from some of the people in the industry I've spoken to, that governments don't really like people drinking.
No, and unfortunately in Scotland, we've had a terrible experience, I have to say, throughout this pandemic. They've really felt the full force of these incredible restrictions that we've seen in Scotland that have banned alcohol sales, that have restricted us only to opening outdoors. And of course, with the banning of music and sound inside venues, it's really robbed the life and the soul out of our pubs up there. So they have really struggled, and we are hoping that we will hear some news from Nicola Sturgeon today about how she plans to reopen the sector, that it has this knock-on effect on what the very core of the Great British Pub is. And we are a community asset. We add so much value, not only to the economy, but also from a social perspective. And when you're stealing every single thing that we do as part of our business model, we're then robbing the very soul of what we do in terms of those venues, providing that place for us to meet and come together and celebrate life, death, everything together. It is very, very bleak outlook that we're seeing for the sector.
Yes. I mean, do you think we'll ever see the return of kind of, the packed out pub that we all remember so fondly? And, it's been a long time, I'm afraid, for me. I think it's probably been, it's probably about a year ago since I've been in a packed pub, to be honest, because even in the pubs that we've been in, when they have been open, you've been getting table service or you've been sitting outside, you just haven't really been in a crowd. And a lot of people missed that.
And I miss the Great British Pub in the way that it was as well. But we have to recognise that we will be having to operate with some restrictions of social distancing for some time till people feel safe. And we recognise that as a sector, and we will play our part for as long as it's necessary to do so. But at some point, when that rollout of the vaccine that is being celebrated, that rightly should, has been out there, the most vulnerable have been protected, we should find a way to open gradually and get back to some normality. And what better symbol of life getting back to normal is when the pub is the pub again. Yeah,
absolutely right. And I mean, long term, would you expect the business to sort of rebound? I mean, the Bank of England have said that they expect there to be a bit of a bounce and a recovery come middle to late part of this year. I mean, presumably that would have to include hospitality.
Well, we are 900,000 jobs in the beer and the pub sector, hospitality over 3 million. We contribute so much to this economy, and we can do that quickly if we are allowed to trade to viable business levels. So if we are allowed to get open, we can really boom the economy. We can create jobs. We're seeing unemployment levels that we haven't seen for many years now. We can create those jobs for young people. 43% of our workforce are young people, 54% of them are women, and we are people that can create those jobs, boost the economy, and lead the way if we're allowed to do what we do best.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right, Emma. Thanks very much indeed. Emma McClarkin there from the British Beer and Pub Association, hoping with some alacrity that the government will see sense, that the government will understand, as she says, that breweries need about 3 weeks. You can't just go, okay, just open the pubs tomorrow then. That's all right. I know that that's not going to happen. I know that Boris Johnson is not likely to get up on Monday of next week and say we can open the pubs. But what he can do is he can say, we hope, if we continue to see a fall in infection rates and a fall in death rates, to be able to say that you can open the pub on, I don't know, March the 20th or March the 15th or April the 1st, so that people can at least make plans. As we've just heard from Emma there, the bottom line for an awful lot of brewers is they need to know when they can start production again, because an awful lot of brewed beer now doesn't last very long. It goes off. We've got business owners who have spent a fortune to make their pubs literally COVID safe. They've spent lots and lots of money, as have loads and loads of restaurants. We haven't forgotten about restaurants because we'll talk to them through the course of this week as well. But you need to get staff back in place. You need to get the places cleaned up. You need to get everything ready, spick and span, for opening up for business once more. And it really does behoove the government, it seems to me, that they need to produce a proper roadmap. None of this kind of vague, blurry, oh, well, we hope to open pubs by May. No, that's not good enough. If you're running a business, you need to know a lot more specific news than that, don't you?